Hi, I'm Dennis Phillips, and welcome to Everyday Reloading and Shooting. The title of this video is Reloading 223 from Start to Finish Evolved. And the reason I added that word evolved is because if you look on my channel and you look at the videos that I've produced, there's another video there entitled Reloading 223 from Start to Finish. And that's basically the entire process that I used for reloading 223 ammo. In this video, I have somewhat evolved, and I think people will oftentimes refer to their reloading experience as their reloading journey. And that's exactly what it is. It's a journey where we learn and we evolve, and sometimes we will change our methods. We will improve our processes, and that's what I think I've done. So if you were to look at that previous video and then look at this one, you'll see some differences in how I prepare my brass. For example, now I decap my brass before I clean it. And when I clean it, I wet tumble instead of dry tumble. And I use steel pins because those pins get inside of those primer pockets and clean that brass. I'll also talk about head spacing your brass as you resize that brass, which I didn't talk about before. So in any event, this video is about how I now reload my 223 ammo from start to finish. And this doesn't just apply to 223. This can apply to any type of reloading. I hope you'll maybe find something here that will help you as your reloading journey evolves. Okay, let's say that you've just gotten back from the range and you've picked up a bunch of brass outdoors. Before you start, you want to take that brass, put it in some kind of bucket or basin or something with a little bit of soapy water, and get any loose dirt and grime off of that brass. There's going to be another step in this process where we tumble that brass to clean it thoroughly, but when you're starting off, you want that brass to just at least be free of any loose debris. So I've got my universal decapping die set up here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to decap this brass. I lay that brass out on a towel to keep it from rolling off of the bench. I understand that your sizing die also has a decapping or depriming function built into it. And so you could size your brass and decap it at the same time. One of the steps in the process is making sure those primer pockets are clean. And so we're going to wet tumble this brass. And by having this brass deprimed before we wet tumble, that's going to save us a step of not having to clean that primer pocket because it'll get clean during the tumbling. And we will demonstrate that here shortly. Okay, so once all the brass has been decapped, we're ready to clean that. So I've got this Frankfurt Arsenal wet tumbler. And then I have these steel pins, stainless steel pins. We're going to drop those into the tumbler with the brass. And then we're going to add a cleaning agent. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add water to our brass and stainless steel pins. We're going to fill it up, not completely full, but maybe where it's a couple of inches from the top. Then I'm going to give it a squirt of Dawn. I don't know how much that is, but it's about a half a second squeeze. And then we're going to add lemon shine. That's probably about as much as you could put in a 9mm case, maybe a little more. We're going to add that. We're going to put the top on, screw it down tight, and then we're going to take it to the tumbler. Please pardon the clutter. This is kind of noisy, so I've got this set up in a part of the basement where it won't disturb or make any noise. And that will get pretty clean in probably 2 or 3 hours. But what I like to do, I'm not going to work it today. I just let it run overnight, and it'll be amazing how clean that brass is, including the primer pockets. Those steel pins will get inside of the brass and inside of those primer pockets, and when we pour that water out, it will be absolutely black. So we're going to let this run, and then we'll come back to it. All right, this thing has been tumbling overnight, so let's take it upstairs and have a look. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the oven on and set that to 200 degrees. I want you to see this water when I dump this out. Oh man, you see how black that is? Look at that. I'm going to be careful not to let the brass fall out because I've also got steel pins in there and they'll come out with it, and I don't want those to get into the drain and get stopped up in the garbage disposal. Now there's still soap. You know, Dawn is a very soapy formula. It creates a lot of suds, and there's still soap inside of those cases. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run some water in there, and I'm going to run these cases around like so. But look at that, would you? That's like brand new. And look at the primer pocket. Can you see how clean that is? Every one of those are just sparkling clean. So cleaning the primer pocket is a step that we don't have to go through now. So I'm going to make sure we've got all the soap out of those cases. And since that primer is out of it, the water will go out of the cases. If you were to try to tumble these with the primer still in there, then you would end up with water inside of the cases, and you would have trouble getting that out. But I think that's good. So we're going to pour that off. And this is my Frankfurt Arsenal media separator. So we're going to pour the cases and the steel pins directly into there. See those pins? So I'm going to close this up. And this is pretty noisy, so this will help. And I'm going to put my hand over that. There's a hole there with a strainer. But we're going to run this for about a minute. All right, that should be good. So I'm going to open this, and wow, would you look at that. That is some good looking brass right there. Then I'm going to take that. I'm going to put that on my cookie sheet. Spread that out. And that beep is telling me the oven has reached its temperature. So I'm going to put those in there for about an hour, and then we'll come back to them. And there's my steel pins, my stainless steel media, and I will go downstairs and separate those out so that they can dry. In fact, the lid here has a screen. Don't know how well you can see that, but that's a very fine screen. You can just turn this lid upside down, set it on top of a bucket, and pour these directly into there for the water to drain out. So we'll give this about an hour, then we'll come back, take those out, and they'll be ready to anneal. I'm going to take this lid, which has this screen in it, and I'm going to lay it right here on top of this paint bucket lid. I'll take this out, set it aside, and then here's my steel pins right here. So I'll take these, dump them right here. There's still a few stuck to the inside here, but I'll come back after that dries and get those with a magnet. And in the meantime, these will sit right here and drain through that screen. The water will drain onto that paint bucket lid, and then I will come back and retrieve these pins after they've dried out. Alright, so the bullets have been cooking here for a little bit. Got my oven mitt, and look at that, would you? That's some good looking brass right there, my friends. Yes, sir. Take my Dollar Tree colander. You want to know how much I paid for that? $1. Dollar Tree is no longer everything $1. It's now $1.25. Thank you, Joe Biden. All right, but there's our brass. Next step is to anneal it. All right, so now we're ready to anneal our brass. And why do we anneal brass? The reason we anneal brass is because it extends the life of your brass. When brass is being reloaded, it becomes work hardened. That's just like if you took two pairs of pliers and you clamp down on either end of this case and you start bending that back and forth. Eventually that case is going to break. That's because that brass gets work hardened. And so when you're reloading brass, you fire it in your rifle, that brass expands to fill the chamber. Then when you run it through your dies, you're going to compress it back down to its original size. You're going to push that shoulder back. And so you're work hardening that brass. So every time you reload, it expands and then you compress it when you reload it back. And eventually, because of that, that brass is going to fail. You'll either get a split neck or you'll get a separation in the case body. What annealing does is it actually softens that brass so that when you run it back through the sizing die, it's more flexible and it gives way without becoming work hardened. And this will extend the life of your brass. I don't know how many times you might reload a 223. I've got some that have probably been reloaded 20 times or more. I have a friend who says he throws his away after it's been reloaded 4 times. I guess he doesn't anneal, but annealing will extend the life of your brass. There are different ways to anneal. You can use an induction annealer, which uses an electrical current, and here's a picture of one. You could also use a flame annealer like this. There are also automated annealers to where you just basically dump your brass into a container and it feeds it into the annealer, anneals it, and drops it out. Well, I don't want to spend that kind of money to anneal my brass. So what I have is I have this ordinary plumber's torch, and I've got a couple of 2x4s attached to a piece of plywood, and I'll lay that torch up there, and I'll use this metal pen from Harry's Farmer's Market to catch the brass in. So I have an old t-shirt laid out here. I put my brass out here. That keeps it from rolling off the table. And I'll light my torch. Okay, so you probably can't see this, but there's an inner flame and an outer flame. The inner flame is probably about 1 inch long, maybe just over. And I have this little Black & Decker drill, and for 223 I've got a 10mm socket attached to it. What I do is I put that piece of brass into that socket to spin it, and I hold it here. And this will probably take about 4 seconds, but you see the color changing there? You see that brown ring around that piece of brass? That's how you know it's annealed. You don't want it to get red hot because that will overdo it. You just want to run it until you get that little bit of discoloration there. And I point the flame towards the shoulder because you're going to be pushing that shoulder back in the press. And so that's the part that you want to soften, is that shoulder and that neck. So you watch that piece of brass until you see that brown ring forming around there. And then you drop it. You don't wait for it to turn red hot. And you don't want to put it right into that blue flame either. You want to hold it out a little ways and point it towards that shoulder. When you see that color change, you drop it. Another thing that you'll see, and it's kind of hard to see here with the lights on, but as that brass starts to anneal, that flame will get just a little bit of red color to it. And you probably can't see it here, but that blue flame will turn to an orange color. And what's happening there is the metals inside of that piece of brass are being cooked out of it by that flame. So you don't want to hold it in that position long. You want to hold it just long enough for that neck and shoulder to get that brown ring around it. And that's how we anneal the brass. And once we're done annealing, then it'll be time to size the brass. Now again, you can spend a lot of money on annealing equipment. I think this tip on this canister probably costs 10 bucks. And the canister of fuel itself probably costs 11 or 12 bucks. But I don't shoot but maybe 50 to 100 rounds a week. So it's not a problem to anneal one at a time. I don't need a lot of fancy annealing equipment. This works just fine. So you see how that piece has that brown ring around the top right here? That's what you want to see. And only maybe a third of the way down on the case. Okay, so our brass has been deprimed, cleaned, and annealed, and now we're ready to run that through the sizing die. But before I do that, I just wanted to show you the difference in these two brass. I've got about 150 rounds here. I showed you the wet tumbling process, and I mentioned that I let this brass run overnight. This brass ran for about 3 hours with the same cleaning solution, but you see this still has sort of a greenish gray tint to it. But this brass is super clean and shiny. And if you compare the primer pockets, these primer pockets where we wet tumbled overnight are actually shiny on this inside. We wet tumble these with steel pins, and that got on the inside of those pockets and cleaned those. It cleaned this as well, but not quite as good. You can see there's still maybe just a little bit of carbon left from the primer. Some of these are better than others. Still has a little bit left. That one's pretty clean. But in any event, 3 hours overnight, they're both going to work for you. You decide. Now, you notice how I've labeled these. 2XF means it's been twice fired. RAM means this is for my Ruger American. The and A means that this has also been annealed. And I also made a note here, some range pickups, decrimp. When you pick up military brass at the range, that has a crimp in it, and I'll show you the crimp removal here shortly. But I made a stupid mistake here. I had all of this brass cleaned and annealed, but the last 50 rounds that I had included maybe 6 pieces that I picked up at the range and threw in there with mine. And the thing is, mine has already been processed and all the crimps have been removed. So that means when I'm seating primers, if I have one that doesn't go in just right, I'm going to have to stop there and remove that crimp at that time. I could go through them all, but that's going to be about 150 pieces of brass for the sake of maybe 6 pieces that I picked up at the range. So in this case, we'll wait until we're actually seating the primers, because almost every one of these are going to seat properly. We've got 6 and 150 that might be a problem. We'll address those as we come to them. This is marked for AR. It's also twice fired brass, but I've marked this for my AR because the head spacing is different on the brass for my AR than it is for the Ruger American. The Ruger American is a bolt action, and I use the Lee breech lock dies to size and reload this brass. But the headspace is different. If I use this brass in my AR, then it's going to, I've had some cases that have actually split because this is going to have about 15 thousandths of headspace in my AR, whereas it only has about 2 thousandths of headspace in my Ruger American. So I've gotten a separate set of dies, and I've got these dies set for the AR to push that back about 2 thousandths. And we'll show you in just a little bit how we headspace. All right. In case you can't tell, I'm sitting here in my PJs. You just saw me lubricate these 3 pieces of brass. And so we're going to talk about headspace. When you fire a piece of brass in your rifle, the pressures inside of that brass cause that brass to expand and fill the chamber. When this bullet is chambered all the way into the rifle chamber, the headspace is the distance between the head of the bullet and the bolt face of the rifle. And if that's too much, then that will cause that case to expand and stretch excessively, and it can even fail and that case can split. So you want to have about 2 thousandths of headspace between the case head and the bolt face so that the case has room to expand, but you don't want it to expand too much. So how do we measure that? I have the Hornady Lock and Load Headspace Comparator Kit, and I have already installed that on my caliper. It just attaches, it screws on right here. You have different bushings that fit onto that body, and they attach with a set screw and an Allen wrench to tighten that. I've already installed the one for the 223 caliber. So we're going to turn that on, and we're going to measure. This is a previously fired case that has not been resized. And so we're going to measure this case, and then we're going to zero the caliper out. Now the sizing die has already been set up. So we're going to run this through the sizing die, and then we're going to check it again. And as you can see, so we've got 2/1000ths of headspace now. So this die is set up correctly. So now we can lubricate and resize the rest of these. If there happened to be too much headspace, what we would have to do would be to loosen this lock ring and turn this maybe 1/8 to 1/4 of a turn to the left, and then check it again. If that's still too much, you turn it again. So you don't want too much headspace in there. If it's too tight and too far down, you're going to get excessive headspace. And of course, I have a second set of dies for my AR. These are rounds that I'm resizing for my Ruger American. So we're going to go ahead and resize with this setup, and we're just going to reload for the Ruger American. And you understand, if you're shooting in an AR, that platform, you may have different headspace, and so you may have to adjust the headspace to make sure that you are not overdoing it. Before you begin resizing, I recommend you do a check on all of your brass. For example, after it has been wet tumbled, you may find a situation like this where your steel pins have gotten stuck in the flash hole. You want to take a chopstick or something and push those out. You want that to be clear, because most sizing dies have a decapping function, and if those steel pins are in there and you run that in there, you run the risk of bending the decapping pin, and then that will no longer be any good. You'll have to send it off to be replaced. So you want to check your flash holes to make sure there's nothing in them. And then you also want to look for this. You see that line on the case going around right there? This case is about to split, and you can take a little device like this. It's basically a paper clip with a little hook on the end, and you put that in there, and you can feel that indentation inside the case. That case has been stretched and it's about to split. Here's another one. It doesn't look quite as bad, but you can feel that indentation right there. You can feel it grab. And so when you see that, do not reload those cases. Toss those. These are some that I've saved. Another thing to look for is a split case neck. When you see that split in the case neck right there, then you want to get rid of that. That's no longer good for reloading. So go through all of your brass. Make sure it's all in good condition, and then you can start your resizing process. So now we're ready to resize the brass, but before we do that, we have to lubricate it, because otherwise you stand the chance of having a stuck case inside of your die, and then that's a pain. So we're going to show you how to lubricate this brass, and we're going to start with the case mouth, and for that I have to insert the cases into the loading block. There are a lot of ways to lubricate a case. What I use is a combination of lanolin and alcohol, but this is 99.5% pure alcohol, and you mix 9 parts of that with 1 part of lanolin. Lanolin is actually called sheep oil because it comes from wool, but what happens here is you'll spray that onto the cases and it evaporates and leaves that oily residue behind. But what I've done is I've sprayed a little bit into the bottom of this little, I think it was an aspirin bottle that I cut up, but I'm going to dip my Q-tip into that, and then I'm going to insert that into the case mouth of each case. There are a lot of different ways to lubricate cases. There are different types of aerosol sprays like a Hornady one-shot, and you stand these cases up and you just spray them with this aerosol spray. And the reason you lubricate the case mouth is because there's an expander ball inside of your resizing die that resizes that case mouth to where you need it to be in order to have the proper tension to hold your bullet. So now we want to lubricate the case body. So here I have a sheet of Tyvek, and I take the cases like this and I just dump them out like so and try to leave them so that they're all turned horizontally. You might want to wear a glove for this. But what I do is I spray each of these cases like this, and I spray a little extra here. I roll them down and I spray them again. And then I roll them through that extra that I sprayed on the edge there and roll them into a little container. You can pick these up at the dollar store, although nothing's really $1 anymore. Now it's $1.25. Thank you, Joe Biden. I may have said that already. Doesn't make it any less true. And then you want to take a paper towel and you want to wipe off this excess lube. And then we will head back to the reloading room. Okay, so for sizing these, I lay out a towel because that helps prevent the cases from rolling off of the bench. And then I have just a couple of sheets of printer paper that I've stapled together. I lay that so. And then I lay out the brass. And that paper towel will help to absorb some of the alcohol off of the brass. As you can see by the coloration, it's been used a few times. And then I'll wipe out my container. Otherwise, it gets kind of sticky. These pieces are a little bit sticky after that alcohol evaporates. But we're going to put this right here. And our sizing die is already set up. So we run each piece through the die. Place the shell on the shell holder, pull the lever, and it gets resized. That shoulder gets bumped back, and the case mouth is resized so that you have the proper tension on your bullet. This is just one step in case prep. So we'll run these, and then we'll move forward. The next step in the process for case prep is trimming your cases. If you're on a budget, you can get a handheld case trimmer like the one that I got from Lee, and it includes a stud that goes into a electric drill, a shell holder. In this case, we are using a number 4. You insert that, you tighten that, then you insert the case gauge with the cutter attached. You run the drill for a few seconds. You can feel it cutting and you can feel it when it stops. You take that out and you see that nice sharp edge on there, showing that case has been trimmed. .75 and 1.5 thousandths, so 1.751. That's certainly within specs. Let's trim another one. Only takes a second and feel it smooth out. .752, certainly within specs. Okay, but what I use is I've got something called the Little Crow Gunworks World Finest Trimmer 2. These are a little more expensive, and you can use those with a drill, but you have to have at least a 1/2 inch chuck. So I use mine with a drill press. And I've already got this set up and adjusted. Let me grab my caliper. What I use for trimming my brass is the World's Finest Trimmer 2. It has a collet inside, so you insert the brass into the trimmer and the cutter measures off of the shoulder. So it's not measuring the overall length like the Lee case trimmer. This measures off of the shoulder. So depending on the setback, you may have to adjust that. So in the case of my AR versus my Ruger American, the Ruger American has a different headspace from the AR. So when I'm trimming brass for the AR, I have to adjust this. So the overall length here is just over 1.76. And I've adjusted this. So hopefully we'll get a good cut here. And now we're at 175.2 1/2. So that's good. Anything between 175 and 176 is good. So I'm going to go ahead and trim these, and then we can do our case prep. And you can feel it when it cuts, and you can feel it when it stops. .751, 1.752 1/2, 1.752 1/2, 1.753, 1.751. And all of these are between 1.75 and 1.76. So we're good on these. After your brass has been trimmed, we need to chamfer and deburr. If you can see this, if you look at the inside of the case mouth, you can see, number one, that top edge is flat and it's sharp. And if you see the inside of that case mouth, there's pieces of brass that are stuck there. And you don't want to leave those there, so you want to remove that. And so you need to chamfer and deburr these cases. And you can do that in a couple of different ways. You can use a manual tool, such as this, a handheld tool. You just put that in there, and that chamfers the inside of that case. And there's a tool for each step. There's a tool to deburr, and there's also a tool to remove the pocket crimp. If this is military brass that you've picked up off the range, you're going to have to remove the crimp. Now, most of mine has already had that crimp removed, and once you do that, you don't have to do that a second time. But what I have here is the Frankfurt Arsenal Case Prep Center, and you can get this with the trimmer built into it. I have the World's Finest Trimmer 2, so I don't need a separate trimmer here. So, and if you should happen to come across a split case neck like this, when you're using the deburring tool, you'll be able to feel that. Can you hear that? You can actually feel that. And that lets you know to get rid of that piece. And this is so much easier than using a handheld tool. If you've got the money to spend, I definitely recommend having a case prep center like this. A little story here too. I had this case prep center for maybe about a year and a half, maybe a little longer, and it started making a grinding noise, and the paperwork said there was a 1-year limited warranty, and so I was a little concerned, so I contacted Frankfurt Arsenal about how to send it back to get it repaired, and they said, we don't really have the 1-year warranty on this. They said, we have a limited lifetime warranty, so send us some photos of it and we'll replace it for you. So I sent them a little bit of video, and just so they could hear the grinding sound. And 2 weeks later, they sent me another one, a brand new unit. So Frankfurt Arsenal, those guys, I can't say enough good things about them. I definitely recommend their products. They definitely stand behind them. And so you can see here the amount of brass that has been removed in this process. So now to clean it up, we're going to dry tumble this, and that will do two things. It will get rid of the lube, and where there may be any pieces of loose brass stuck to the case on the inside, it will also get rid of that. So we'll dry tumble these to take care of that. All right. There is actually one more step that we want to go through before we reload these, and we want to remove the lube. And you know we wet tumbled earlier, but I'm going to use some dry tumbling media. This is ground corncob media, and I've labeled this lube removal. So we're going to tumble these for about an hour, maybe 30 minutes, and that's to just get that excess lube off of there, so we'll have a nice dry case to handle when we're reloading them. Otherwise, they're going to be sticky on your hands. All right, so let's take these to the tumbler, get them going. All right, so we got those started. We'll come back here to those shortly and continue. So after you're done with your case prep, if you want to clean off your case prep center, you can take a little toothbrush. Doesn't really have to be cleaned off, but doesn't hurt. And then to clean up the debris, we have a mini shop vac. Then make sure you get it all. Take a rag, and then shake the rag out. Our cases should be ready. They've been dry tumbling for probably an hour while I was doing other things. We're going to put these through the same media separator that we used when we were wet tumbling. Except first, I'm going to dump the media back into the container it came out of. And I'm going to sip that. If you don't have a media separator, you can use a little sifter like this that you get at the dollar store. You'll probably pay $1.25 for it though. Thank you, Joe Biden. And just to make sure that we get all of the media out of the inside of the cases, we're going to run it through here for a minute. Yes, I removed the steel pins before starting this. All right, that should be good. I'm going to pour these out on a towel. Now we're going to check these to make sure that there's no corncob media trapped in the flash hole. And we're also going to check to make sure they fit the case gauge nice and flush, just like that. And we'll look at that as we drop it in, just to make sure not only that it's flush, but there's nothing in the flash hole either. So we go through this, and then we'll be ready to reload. The thing is, if it doesn't fit the case gauge, it may not fit your rifle chamber either. And really, your rifle chamber is your best case gauge. So if you are uncertain, you might want to reload a few of these, maybe 4 or 5, and check and make sure they fit your rifle chamber. If you have one that protrudes above the top of the case gauge, these all fit flush. But if you have one that doesn't fit all the way down and it extends just a little bit, maybe the thickness of the case head, then you want to resize that and try again. If it won't fit, if you can't make it fit, sometimes you can turn it around like that. There might be a little burr on the head of the case to keep it from going in, and then it may fall flush like that. But if it doesn't fit flush, I wouldn't use it in my rifle. All right, we're getting ready to reload. So as mentioned, we're going to sort these cases by weight. And I have a piece of tape here with measurements from 91 to 95 and then over 95. This one's over. I'm just going to set those aside for a minute. 91.7. So that'll go in here. 93.1. That will go in here. And these may not be grouped exactly by weight, but they will be grouped close. So like here I've got 92 and 94. This was 92.2, so I put it in between. So we will do our best to sort these by weight, 93.5. And I think you get the idea. So we'll come back when I've done here. And I think we have enough sorted by weight here that we can have some pretty consistent groups separated by weight. I'm going to go ahead and separate those into the loading block here before we seat our primers. In case you were wondering how many of these that weighed the same or the same head stamp, I have not yet checked, but out of curiosity, let's check. 3 LCs, a Frontier, a Federal, and 3 others that match. Anyway, those were the same case weight. It's not exact, but we're grouping them as close as we can. Okay, so now that we've selected our rounds and sorted by weight, we're ready to seat our primers. Okay, so all of our cases have been decapped, wet tumbled, sized, trimmed, and prepped. And now it's time to seat the primers. So I have for that task my Frankfurt Arsenal handheld priming tool, which it has shell holders for multiple calendars, small and large rifle primers. So we'll take the tray. This is already set up for the .223 caliber. I'll open the tray. I've used Federal gold medal primers in the past, and those have worked quite well. I have not used the Federal number 205, but we're going to give those a try and see how they pan out. So we insert them into the tray as such. We shake them a little bit. Most of these will upright themselves. There's a few stragglers here, but basically we touch them and we're able to flip those over. The bottom of this tray has these little raised dots on it, which grabs onto that edge of the primer, and it allows you to flip it over. Alright, so I'm going to reinsert the cover. Okay, and insert the tray into the priming tool. We'll take our first case, insert it into the shell holder. Oh, there's a little door there. I have to open that door, and that lets the primers feed through. I insert the case into the priming tool, squeeze the handle, and we have a perfectly seated primer. Sometimes if they don't seat exactly right when you first try to pull the handle, if you turn them a little bit, they may square up and seat a little better. These are seating pretty well so far. It is possible, it has not happened with this particular tool, but I've had handheld priming tools in the past that actually allowed a primer to flip upside down. And yes, you can seat them upside down, and no, they will not fire. The other 50 that I didn't use, I'll put back into this box. It's a bullet box, a Hornady bullet box. But I've labeled it Federal 205, and it goes with my other primers right here. We're done with this. Alright, so now what kind of bullets are we going to make? I just happen to have some 73 grain ELD match. And let's take a look at Hornady and see what they say. I've got some Varget powder. I would like to use that. Okay, the Varget for a 73 grain ELD match, it's the same as their 75 grain ELD match, same as their 75 Boattail hollow point match. Varget powder, we've got 5 charge weights from 2200 to 2600 feet per second. So we got 22, 23, 24, 25, and 2600 feet per second. So we're going to load at those charge weights from 19.4 to 23.5 grains of powder, and we're going to load 10 of each, and we're going to see how those perform. So I'm going to take a piece of tape, and I'm going to mark these with Varget powder 19.4, 20.4, 21.5, 22.5, and the top of the charge weight is 23.6. Excuse me, it's 23.5. I'm going to go 23.3 to be on the safe side. Okay, and we'll watch for pressure signs as we shoot these. So now we need to dispense the powder. Now there are a couple of ways we can do that. I had the Hornady Auto Charge Pro automatic powder dispenser. You see a picture of that here. I could use that. Or for those of you who don't have that set up, we're going to use the M500 beam scale. So first we want to zero the scale. So we're going to put the weights on 0 at both ends. And in order to get a better view of this, I have an old iPhone. I turn the camera on, and I have this little jig set up for it. So we've got the scale here, and I'm going to, well, as soon as it stops moving, so I've got this little jig to hold the phone, and I can see that the scale is pretty much on target. Okay, there we are at 0. Okay, so now we're going to set this for 19.4 grains. So we're going to go 5, 10, 15. And then on this side, we're going to go to 19. And then 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've got 15 here, 19.4 grains. So now we're going to take our powder dispenser. So this is my RCBS Uniflow, and I'm going to load this with Varget powder. I do not know what charge weight it will throw, but we will check it and see. And that's much heavier than 19. So we're going to have to back off on this a bit. There's a screw on the side, we'll loosen it, and then you have to back off on this in order to reduce it. And that doesn't budge it, so we reduced it too much. We want to throw a charge that's just under. And that's just over. And we're going to need a funnel, and we're also going to need a powder trickler. This is a stick powder, so it's very difficult to meter. It's like metering firewood. Okay, so we're going to back off of that a little. And we're going to try this charge. Okay, and that's just slightly low, which is where we want it. So let's see if you can see this. We'll zoom in here. And you see the iPhone on the left, and you see the powder trickler on the right. And we have to load the tube. In just a second, you'll see it start to drop its powder charge. Okay, and it just dropped a granule. There's another. And you see the iPhone is up to 0. So the charge is where it should be. Take the charge, drop it in the case. Move the funnel. Dispense another charge. Put it on the scale. It's a little bit light. So we'll take the trickler and we'll add a few granules of powder until we get 0 on showing on the iPhone here. And there we are. We charge the second case and move the funnel. Throw another charge. Set it on the scale. That one's just a tad on the high side, so we're going to try to drop just 1 or 2 granules of powder out of here. This is the reason why you can't dispense directly into the case, because this extruded power meters so unevenly. You have to, if you want the charges to be the same and consistent, you have to use a trickler. Okay, so there we go. We'll drop the third charge. All right, enough of this. You see how it's done? I'm going to show you a better way. This is the Hornady Auto Charge Pro. We plug in the power. We turn it on. And the first thing we do is calibrate. So we hit 0, calibrate, and CAL is flashing. The number 10 is flashing, so we put the 10-gram weight on there. It registers 10 grams. We remove that. Now it's asking for 50, so we put the 50-gram weight on. It measures 50. We take that off, and it tells us we pass. So we put the tray on. Now we want 19.4 grains. So our target is 194. Enter. And then we tell it to dispense. We have to first 0 out the scale. Now tell it to dispense. And it tells us we've got 19.4. We drop the charge, move the funnel, put the pan back. It zeroes itself and dispenses the second charge automatically. This is a whole lot easier than using a beam scale and a powder trickler. Drop the charge, move the funnel, replace the pan. It dispenses the powder. 19.4. Okay, that's 10 at 19.4. Now we're going to load 10 at 20.4. So we're going to press target, 20.4, or just 204, and it adds the decimal point in there. We enter that. Getting some powder accumulating. 0. Dispense. And there we go, 20.4. I replace the tray, and it dispenses the next charge. Oh, move the funnel. I think you see how this is going. So we'll come back when it's time to seat the bullets. So once all of the cases have been charged with powder, you want to go back with a flashlight if necessary and do a visual inspection on every case and make sure every case was charged with powder. It's not very likely that you'll accidentally double charge a case, because what will happen is if you put a second charge, that powder will back up into the funnel. It won't fill the case, and then when you lift the funnel, powder will spread everywhere, and you'll know that you've accidentally double charged it. But it can also be a problem, maybe even a bigger problem, if you accidentally fail to charge a case. And that's because there's enough power in the primer to dislodge the bullet from the case, but it would just drive it into the lens and it wouldn't exit the barrel. And then you've got a stuck round in your barrel, so you have to end your day at the range and get that stuck round out of your barrel. If you were to make the stupid mistake of trying to shoot a second shot to clear it, in all likelihood that rifle is going to explode and blow your face off. So you don't want that to happen. So always make sure that everyone is charged and that none have been missed. And we're good. So now we're ready to seat the bullets. All right, we're down to the last step of this reloading process, which is seating the bullets. So I've laid out a towel here, and I've dumped out my 73 grain ELD match bullets on this towel. Of course, as mentioned, that keeps them from rolling off the table. And I'm going to turn all of these in the same direction. It just makes them easier to pick up, so I don't have to fumble around with them. Because at my age, if I drop something on the floor when I go down to get it, I'm going to look around and see if there's anything else I can do while I'm down there. So anyway, these are all turned the same way now. And I have my seating die set up, and it's been adjusted. So I'm going to take my first case, insert it into the seating die. I'll insert the bullet. And I'm going to back this off a little bit because I don't remember what was seated last. These are going to be seated at 2 1/4 inches. So I'm going to turn on my caliper. And this is at 2.34, so we've got a ways to go. .3. 2.258. These don't have to be exact, but we do want them to be as close as we can get them. 2.2525. Because the bullets are not exactly perfect. There's some difference in the ogive, but we want them to be as close as we can. Okay, this is at 2.252. So we're going to go with that. That's only 2 thousandths longer. So we're going to seat all of these, and then we'll be ready to take them to the range. And you notice that I'm loading these one at a time because I have the charge weight noted on my loading block, and so I'm going to keep these separated. And once we're done loading, we're going to pack them up separately so that we don't get those charge weights confused. There is one more step that I need to insert here. If you're going to be shooting these rounds through an auto loader like an AR or a Mini 14, it's important that you crimp the cases. I have my crimp die set up here, and most seating dies also have a crimp function, and you can either set that up to use the crimp function or to bypass it. But I have a separate crimp die with mine, and it puts a little ring around the top there. I don't know if you can see that, but here's a photo that might help you see it a little better. But that helps to secure the bullet in place, and so when you're using that in an auto loader, it will assist with feeding, and also if it should get stuck on the feeding ramp, that will keep the bullet from being pushed up into the case. So you will have instructions with your die to tell you how to set that up. But if you're going to be shooting out of an AR platform or something like a Mini 14, make sure that you crimp these cases. All right? And there you go. So there we have it, folks. 50 little soldiers loaded up, ready to march off into battle. As far as packaging these, I have these 10-round magazines that I'll be using. So what I do is I start with magazine number 5. I take the charge weight and I tape it onto the magazine right there. And then I load these. If you don't want to use 10-round magazines, or if you don't have 10-round magazines, you can use ammo boxes, or you can use Ziploc baggies and label those with a piece of tape. That works very well. But this is my system, and this works very well for me. So there we have it. All of the rounds have been loaded into magazines. That will save me time at the range from not having to stop and reload. Of course, the barrel will probably stay hotter than it should. And one last thing before you forget, you want to make sure you write down what you loaded, the number of rounds, the bullet that you loaded, the powder, the charge weight for each, the case, the primer, and the overall length. And then you'll have this to refer back to. But that's my reloading process from start to finish. You've seen the entire process. So I hope you'll find some information here that's helpful for you in your own reloading journey. And if you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. And as always, if you have an idea or a thought, or maybe you do something a little bit differently, then you're certainly welcome to leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll always try to interact with everyone that leaves a comment. Thanks for watching.